And we are back for another episode of TPS, the Productivity Show. My name is Tam. I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I have with me my co-host, Brooks Duncan. How are you today, buddy?
I'm awesome. Excited about I always get the most excited for the nerdy topics. So I'm very excited for today's topic.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about password management. And as always, we like to kick things off with our top three favorite resources as of lately. And Brooks, I know you have three of them here today. So can you quickly go over them?
Yeah, so I thought I'd do something a little different this week. And our top three resources, I pulled all of them from the dojo, which is our productivity community, always sharing a lot of resources in there. So I thought I would see what the dojo members are into these days. And so I will share our top three resources now. So number one is called Mailbird. And Mailbird is an email client for Windows. There's a lot of popular third-party email programs for the Mac, but not as many for Windows. And there was an interesting thread in the Dojo Slack about email clients for Windows, and Milan and Martin both recommended Mailbird, and it seems to be a really popular one. So I thought I would share that one. Number one, Mailbird. Number two is Authy. So Authy is a two-factor authentication app. We're going to be talking a bit about that today. And it's an alternative to Google Authenticator. So we're going to be talking about two-factor authentication. The most common way to do that is Google Authenticator, but there are third-party apps that will do that as well. We're going to talk about a few as we go through today, but a really popular one is called Authy, and that was recommended by Matt in the dojo. And the final one is called Beautiful.ai, Beautiful.ai. And that is an online presentation maker. So if you're making presentations, the traditional way to do that is PowerPoint or Keynote, but there's a lot of online options as well. And Beautiful.ai is a really nice looking online presentation maker. It has smart templates. It will kind of like help you build it out as you're going. That was recommended by Alice and Kimberly as well. So those are our top three resources. And as always, they're always linked in the show notes at theproductivityshow.com/340.
Awesome. Those are great resources. So definitely check those out, people. So today's episode is going to be all about password management. So if you're listening and you're someone who keeps their password on a sheet of paper or a Post-it note somewhere, or you have a document on your desktop called Passwords.doc, I think this episode is especially important for you because I think we're going to help you get into the 21st century here and show you a better way of managing your passwords that's a little bit more secure. And even if you're someone you kind of use a password manager already, and maybe you even use the same passwords on a bunch of different sites, oh boy, like you are in store for an episode that I think is going to rock your world. So be sure to listen to today's episode because we have 5 tips to help you here today to make sure that your online presence is a lot more secure now going forward. And for those who are already using password managers, maybe like the built-in one on your phone or on your computer, or even maybe a tool like LastPass, Dashlane, 1Password, but you aren't sure what else you can do with those particular tools, we're going to show you some different ways you can get the most out of them. Because I know sometimes they can be pricey, but if you know how to use them with the additional features that they come with, I think you'll get a lot out of it. So there's a lot of bang for buck there. So today's topic, again, is all about password management. And next week's episode is going to be about contact management. So I'm really excited for that episode as well. So if you're someone who wants to learn about managing contacts, network better, you want to make sure you stay tuned for next week's episode as well. So, Brooks, let's talk about passwords. And before we start diving into the tips, I think it's a good idea to kind of start off with overall password management and just password practices. So, what in your eyes are important best practices around passwords?
Yeah, the password recommendations is something that's hard to keep track of as well because the recommendations that are out there are constantly changing. You know, anyone who's worked in a company has maybe had to reset their password monthly or every 2 months or every quarter or something like that. Now that's recommended against as a good password practice. You're not supposed to be changing your password all the time. Used to recommend like changing number, like a letter to a number, maybe putting one symbol at the end or something like that. That isn't good enough as well. There's all sorts of different things that you should do. And the way people are cracking passwords and guessing passwords is becoming more and more powerful. The most important password tip, though, and you kind of mentioned it a couple minutes ago, is to have a different password for each site. This is by far the most important thing. Often we hear about these big websites getting hacked and stuff like that. Usually, that website itself is not hacked in the way we're probably thinking of. Usually, what happens is someone has reused a password somewhere, that password has gotten out, and then hackers have managed to work their way into other systems because that person has reused passwords. So it's really, really important to use a different password for each site. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds like a massive pain. How are you supposed to remember all that? And we're going to be talking about some ways that you don't have to remember that as we go through the episode today. Ideally, what you want to do is either kind of go two different approaches. One, use a long string of random characters. So don't try to come up with something yourself. Use a long string of random characters. Or you can use a combination of random words that's in a memorable phrase. So if you want to be able to memorize passwords, don't necessarily recommend that, but for some people, that's the way they want to do it. What you want to do is have random words in a phrase, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. The key, though, is random. It turns out that people are really, really bad at coming up with random anything, random character strings, random words. It's always generated for things we know or things we see in front of us. So you want to use a tool that will help you generate a random password, like one of the password managers we're going to be talking about in a moment, or something called Diceware, we have a link to a Diceware tool in the show notes, and it will help you generate a truly random password, not just one we think about. As far as password recommendations, I just want to close by linking to in the show notes, we'll link to a very famous cartoon by XKCD. It's famous for the phrase "correct horse battery staple." That is, it's a good demonstration of how using a long, memorable phrase is better than just changing up some characters in a shorter password. And you might have seen that cartoon in the past. One thing I will say about that is the recommendation is still pretty good, but the now current recommendation is if you're going to have a memorable phrase, have at least 6 words, not just 4 like is in the cartoon. But again, we will link to that. And the solution to dealing with all of this is to use a password manager. And that's what we're going to talk about today, some of the ways that you can use a password manager.
So I guess if I tell people that my password is the productivity show's awesome sauce 12345, that would technically be a good password because it's easy to remember and it's true. But according to this, it's not random enough. So in that case, it wouldn't really apply.
Exactly right. So yeah, you want to have something that will generate a password for you, and a password manager is a tool that will do that. And what a password manager is, in case you don't know, is it's a tool that will securely store your passwords and other sensitive information in it. And this is important because we talked about how you need to have a different password for every site, but no person can really remember all of these different passwords for all of the different sites we use. So you want to use a password manager that will store those really secure passwords in a really secure way so that you don't need to remember it. You just need to remember how to access your password manager. And then once you do that, then you can get into all your other different sites. And depending on the type of password manager you use, it will help you do it in a really efficient and productive way as well. That's the best thing about that. It increases our security, but it also makes our life way easier as well.
Yeah, and if you're listening right now and you go, password manager, I've never heard of this. Like, can you repeat that one more time or can you explain it differently? Think of it this way. Imagine for a moment that you just have one program that stores all the different passwords you ever created in your life for all the different websites, right? So one for your Gmail account, one for your CRM, one for your bank accounts, one for like your calendar, one for X, Y, and Z, right? And they all have a different password. Well, again, it's going to be difficult for you to memorize unique passwords for all of them. However, when you use a tool like a password manager, what it allows you to do is store all those different logins into one place. And then in order for you to access that place, that app that stores all the access points and the data and your usernames and passwords and so on, you just need to memorize one password. And so if you can use that to log into your kind of like password app that then allows you to log into all your different accounts, you just have to memorize one password that's really secure, right? And that's why we started off saying, hey, here are some best practices around really good passwords, because if you can use that then for your password manager app, then you just have to memorize one password and you can log into all of your accounts. And so that's why it's so important that whenever you use like something like LastPass, 1Password, Dashlane, or something else, even like the built-in tools, that you just have to memorize one password to be able to unlock everything. And ideally that password doesn't get compromised, right? And if it does, you want to make sure you change that ASAP. So there's a little bit of convenience there that, you know, your that's a bit of a trade-off in that sense, but I think it's totally worth it, because what it allows you to do is, for example, even if I'm on my phone, for example, I use 1Password as my password manager. I can then log into my Gmail. I can log into my bank account by just logging into 1Password and then navigating the web from there. So I can still use the built-in Safari app on my phone or Chrome on my desktop, because a lot of those tools kind of have like integrations built in. And so you're able to like quickly access stuff. And I think the biggest game changer for both of us has been when you use this particular tool, you actually log into a lot of places a lot faster than if you would do it yourself. So we're going to be sharing some tips with you here today, and we actually have 5 of them. And so the first tip when it comes to password management is to start using the built-in password management tool that already comes with your browser or even your operating system, right? So for those who are brand new to all of this, I'm sure you've seen it. You're trying to log in somewhere, you get a pop-up saying by Chrome or Safari or even by iOS or Mac or Windows saying, hey, do you want us to remember this password, or even sometimes their credit card info, right? And I'm sure you've seen that before. You might declined it, or you if you're like my parents, you just automatically decline all the time, you just never use it. But it's kind of like the simplest version of a password manager that you can use as a way to kind of like start storing stuff online securely without having to memorize a lot of different passwords.
Yeah, it's definitely better than nothing. And like you said, if you're logging into a site and it asks you to come up with a password, the password that your browser or your, say, iPhone or whatever tool you're using generates is going to be better, chances are, than whatever you come up with off the top of your head. So, and it's definitely great to have those things stored. And a big benefit of using this is it's something we already have. It's already built into Chrome. It's already built into Firefox. It's already built into Mac OS, Safari with the iCloud keychain. So there's a lot of good things about the built-in tools. Our personal opinion, or I guess I shouldn't speak for you, my personal opinion is it's not quite as good, though, as a real password manager, which we're going to be talking about in a moment. One of the downsides of these tools is that they're often locked in their own silo. So, for example, if you use, say, the mobile Safari on your phone, but Chrome on your computer, then those two don't talk to each other. The Safari will go between devices, but the Safari and the Chrome won't. So it's kind of locked into its own different silos. Also, usually these tools will only store passwords, which is, it's called a password manager. This episode is what we're talking about. But really, a lot of these password management tools that we're going to be talking about will store a lot of other things. The built-in password manager in your browser or in your operating system isn't going to store much more other than passwords. And also, they don't have great features for sharing passwords, managing passwords, getting alerted about things. They're missing a lot of these extra features that a third-party password manager has. So again, it's much better than nothing for sure, but in our opinion, it's not quite as good as using a quote-unquote real password manager.
Yep. And I think the other thing that I've noticed in terms of benefits for using like an outside third-party tool is just the integrations that come with that. And so not only is it more cross-platform, but you just have way more integrations with other stuff as well. So for example, there's an integration between like 1Password, which is the tool I use, and then integrating that, for example, with OmniFocus. So for example, in a task, I can say, hey, log into bank account to pay my monthly bill or something if it's not automated, and then I can have a link to it to that website via a 1Password link, and then I can click on it, and then it will automatically log me in, assuming I'm logged into my 1Password account. If I'm not logged in, then I would have to log in first, but then it would automatically log me in afterwards. So there's like all these little advanced tips and tricks that you can use that just don't come with a built-in password manager. So if you're just brand new to password managers in general, I would say, hey, this is a good start to use the built-in tools to kind of get an idea of like, oh yeah, they can generate, like random passwords for me and kind of store them, and I'll just use them there. But once you kind of want to level up a little bit, and assuming you're listening to our show, I think you're one of those people, then you definitely want to listen up to the other 4 tips that we have here to really step it up a notch. So again, that's tip number 1. The built-in password manager tool is a great stepping stone to start using if you're brand new to this. Okay. Now, before we move on to tip number 2 here, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our TPS Plus subscribers. So we have an upgraded version of the productivity show called TPS Plus, or the Productivity Show Plus. And this is where you get episodes ad-free and also a week early. So once you become a member of TPS Plus, you not only will get that, but also get an audio bonus course on the T framework, which is our productivity methodology, along with a bunch of other benefits as well. And if you are an annual member, you get one of our cool t-shirts that's exclusively made for TPS Plus members that says 1 tweak a week. So that's been really popular. I want to thank everyone who's been supporting the show. And if you want to support the show or get access to some of the extra bonuses, be sure to go to theproductivityshow.com/plus. All right, let's move on to tip number 2 here. And if you're like, okay, I'm beyond, the basic tools that come built in with the operating system or phone, I'm ready for another task manager, then tip number 2 applies to you here, and that is to use a third-party password manager. Now, I kind of mentioned already that I use 1Password. I know Brooks uses 1Password as well. And so the reason we like this one over other ones is something we'll kind of start diving deeper into just a little bit. But the reason we think third-party password managers are superior is because you just have way more options. So like Brooks mentioned, you're not stuck into a silo. Like if you use it on your iPhone in Safari, you can not use it right in Chrome on the desktop. Well, if you use a third-party tool, now you can. Now you can use something on Safari on your iPhone and in Chrome on your computer, and because you're using a third-party tool. So even though the concepts are similar, you now have a lot more options available regardless of which device you use, whether it's an Android, iPhone, Mac, Windows, right? There's just so much more flexibility there. And so I think most people who listen to the show should really be using a third-party password manager.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's lots of great ones out there. Like you said, we both happen to use 1Password for our personal password manager. LastPass is another really popular one. Dashlane is another one that's really popular. It's funny too. And if you've tried a password manager before and you just it couldn't stick, you just couldn't get into the flow of using it, it could be that the concept of a password manager isn't the problem. It's just that particular one just didn't hook for you for whatever reason. Like for example, I've been trying to get my dad to use password managers forever, and he had 1Password, but just for whatever reason he just couldn't make it work for him. He just couldn't wrap his head around it. However, he heard about Dashlane and tried it out, and for him personally, he found it way easier to use, and now he's like a Dashlane a Dashlane fanatic. So it really try different tools and see which one sticks for you. I like 1Password because I've used it since 2010. So I've been using it a very long time. I personally find it really easy to use. I have to admit, I'm a little almost speechless because I never thought of using 1Password links in things like task managers and stuff like that. So that is such a great tip that I had never even considered. So I'm getting stuff out of this episode as well. But yeah, the one thing I will say about using a password manager, if you're going to use any password manager, and this, not to get a little morbid here, but if you are going to use a password manager, one thing you might consider doing is making sure that there's information on how to access it somewhere that your loved ones can get access to it. If anything ever happens to you, maybe it is like store it. Some people store it with their will, their password manager password with their will or something like that. So that as anything ever happens to us, people have a way to get access to our stuff. So that is kind of like a little tip for you for 1Password. But yeah, try different password managers, see which one works for you, but highly recommend using one.
Yeah, I've been using 1Password since 2013, I want to say. So about 8 years now. And I mean, I started off using it just because I heard it was like a good idea. So I just did it out of curiosity. And I just started using it in terms of like storing passwords. And then I started storing serials for apps that I bought. That was back in the day a thing. Whereas nowadays, serials is not really a thing anymore because, you buy stuff in the App Store and so on. I would have travel documents in there as well. I also have like profiles in there. So the cool thing about profiles, at least on 1Password, is that I know all of us have done online shopping where you fill in your name, address, phone number, and so on. So with profiles, you can actually have it automatically be filled in. And so, for example, if I'm buying something for personal use, I could say personal profile. And then if I just click on that, it will automatically fill out the form, have my personal address in there, and so on. Whereas if I try to purchase something under the Asian Efficiency brand or for the company, then I might have like additional fields that need to be filled in, like a tax ID number or the company name or like a different address and so on. It makes it really easy to fill out the form. So that's like another kind of like more advanced tip that I think a lot of people would benefit from. And to take it even a step further, Brooks, I don't know if that's the case with Alfred because I'm, as you know, a LaunchBar user, but 1Password is indexable with LaunchBar. So I can actually log into websites via LaunchBar and then automatically launch websites that way. So that's another way I can kind of integrate it, right? And so once I launch it that way, if I'm not logged into 1Password, I would still have to obviously log into 1Password first before I can use it. But that's another way to kind of like step it up a notch and have just the integrations all over the place. And because again, I think one of the biggest strong points of using a third-party app like this is just the integrations that you have available across all platforms, right? So whether you use Chrome, Safari, Mac, Windows, iOS, Android. I mean, you can just use it all over the place. And so that's why I think anybody that's listening to this should really consider that. And you might be asking, okay, why do you guys use 1Password over LastPass and Dashlane? Again, pick the one that's kind of like, works for you. Now, we've been using 1Password for so many years, and we actually used LastPass at one point as well for the company, but we then switched back to 1Password later on, which we'll get to a little bit later why. But now we basically use it for both personal and company use as well. So if there's one recommendation that we personally have, it is 1Password.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, but one of the benefits of a third-party password manager, is that ability to store more than just passwords. And I make heavy use of this. So there's a feature called Secure Notes, and you can store like images and stuff like that in there as well. So I store things like my family's passport information, all the like school IDs for my kids, because you're constantly needing to fill out something and you need their student number or something like that. So I've got all that there. All sorts of like information for my family and me personally, like bank account numbers and stuff like that. All are in the secure note section of 1Password, which is really, really helpful for keeping it secure, but also accessible from whatever device I have. So that's one benefit of having a secure way to store stuff rather than just having, like a note on your phone or something like that. You want it some things you want a bit more secure.
Yep. So again, that is tip number 2 here today, is to use a third-party password manager. So pick one there and you'll be good to go. All right, let's move on to tip number 3 here, and that is to use your password manager for two-factor authentication. So if you're not familiar with what two-factor authentication is, you've probably seen this in action before. Maybe you log into your bank account online, and before you log in, You type in username and password, and then on the next step, it will say, hey, we're going to send you a text message just to make sure that you are the person who actually has this login information and is the right person. And then you get a text message with a code, right? And then you have to type in that code into the online form. And then once you've done that successfully, then you actually log in, right? So two-factor authentication is kind of like an extra step to make sure that even if someone steals your username and passwords, if you have those in place, they still need that second layer, that second code, if you may call it, in order to actually log in. So if they don't have access to your phone, then, well, bad luck for them, they can't log in, right? And so that's what two-factor authentication is. And nowadays it's becoming more and more popular. You see this on more places now. And some places it's optional and some places it's mandatory. So a lot of times what we get is either a text message, right? But some websites will also require that you actually store it in an app. So especially for stuff like Gmail or anything that you do with Google, they always require that you store it on a third-party app, or such as their app, which is the Google Authenticator app. And so you would then, scan this like QR code with this app, right, that you install on your phone. And then based on that, anytime you log in, it will generate a new code on your phone via the app. And then you would punch it in and then you can actually use it, right? So that is all fine and dandy, and that's very secure. However, what a lot of people don't know is that this two-factor authentication can actually be used within the Password Manager app as well. So you don't have to actually install a third-party app. You can actually have it built into your Password Manager tool. So to give you an example, if I log into, let's just say Xero, which is kind of like the accounting software that we use at Asian Efficiency, I can log in under my email address and then log in there. And then it will then require me to enter a code. And instead of opening up my phone to look for the Authenticator app and then, pressing the numbers that appear on my phone, I can actually just open 1Password and it will generate a code within the 1Password app. And then I can automatically log in there. And it's actually a lot smoother, because a lot of times what happens is if 1Password knows that you have a two-factor authentication on that particular website, once you're logged in and you get on the next stage, it will actually copy the generated code onto your clipboard, and all you have to do is paste and then move forward. So that's something really cool and nifty. A lot of people don't know about this feature. So check your Password Manager app and just study how to implement two-factor authentication. And I'm telling you, this is going to change the game for you.
Yeah, I have to admit, this is something that I heard that 1Password and the other password managers can do. And I heard it and I'm like, oh yeah, but how hard is it to just grab my phone? It's, I'm fine. Google Authenticator is just fine for me, whatever. However, recently Tan had been posting in the dojo about how great it is and how seamless it is. And I thought, oh, maybe I should give it a try, but then I just never prioritized it. But then I recently got a new phone, and anyone who has used something like Google Authenticator knows how much of a pain it is when you change phones. So I decided, all right, that now, since I have to go through these hoops anyway, I'm just going to switch everything over to 1Password. And so I've since done that, and I really wish I did it a long time ago, because like Tan said, the ability to have that code from any of your devices, not just your phone, also the ability to have it automatically copied to your clipboard, both just such great time-saving features. One of those features that you don't really know that you need until you have it.
Yeah, I think the best way I can describe the experience is when, for those of you who have iPhones, when you first start using Face ID, like you don't know that you want it and needed it until you have it. And then you go, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. This is so much more efficient than even just using your thumb to log into your phone, right? So this is one of those things as well. Like you might not think you don't need it, but once you get a taste of it and you see how efficient it is, you just can't go back. So if you're someone who has to like change their phone in the upcoming like few weeks or so, this is like the perfect time to do it. This is kind of what forced me to do it, because I change phones like every other year or so. And I recently had upgraded my new phone to the iPhone 12. And I was like, okay, or actually the iPhone 11, this was like a year ago. And I had a few like in Google Authenticator still left, and a few, everything was, in 1Password. But once I moved over to the iPhone 12, I said, okay, let's just move everything over to 1Password, because I just had a few left in the Authenticator app. And I just already knew how efficient it was, but just having everything there now, I just never have to be around my phones in order to log into stuff. So it's just one of those little things. Again, you don't know how efficient it is until you actually have it. So if you're listening to this and you're inspired by this, definitely go implement this feature right now. So again, that is tip number 3, to use your password manager for 2-factor authentication. All right, so let's move on to tip number 4 here. And for those of you who have families, this is going to be really relevant because you can also use a family password manager. Now, I don't have a family personally. I know you have a big family, Brooks. So can you explain what a family password manager is and how it is different from anything else that we talked about here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have 2 kids and one one wife. So depending on your perspective, it's a big family, I guess. But yeah, a lot of these tools like LastPass has one, Dashlane has one. I use the 1Password one. I subscribe to the 1Password family plan and have for a long time. And the benefit of a family plan, like the reason that they have these, is because when you are in a household with other people, there's some passwords that you want just for you, not for secrecy reasons. I mean, maybe, but just, my wife doesn't care about my QuickBooks Online password. That is not going to do anything for her. So you can have your own passwords just to you, but you can also share certain passwords to the whole family. So for example, like I said, my QuickBooks Online password, my wife doesn't care about that. She doesn't need to see that. So that's just for in my 1Password. However, to access our joint banking account or something like that, or our Netflix account, that type of stuff, we have a shared family vault that anybody in the family can access. And this is really, really helpful. It means that you're not like you're always having to ask one specific person for the password. It means that if I'm traveling somewhere, my wife can access the bank and vice versa. It just makes it really, really handy. And most of these tools have done it in a very thoughtful way of being able to have some for you, some for the kids, some for my wife, and some for all of the family. So yeah, we've really, really benefited from the 1Password family plan, and that concept is what finally got my wife away from the Password.doc into a password manager, is just having this ability to access the family's stuff. The only downside, not downside, but the only thing is it takes a little bit more thought, because when you're saving a password, you want to think to yourself, like, should this be just for me or the family? So it does take a bit more thought when you're saving things, but really that's like a quarter of a second. So it's not that big of a deal, but it is a great feature to have if you live with other people.
So to clarify here, Brooks, does every family member then have their own unique password to log in, or does everyone have the same password to log into the password manager?
Yeah, so everybody has their own their own password. So everyone has their own password, and then in 1Password parlance, different tools call it different things. But in 1Password parlance, everybody has their own password, their own vault, it's called, which is where they store their personal logins and information. And then what happens is, if they're part of the family, the Duncan family, as we call it, then they can then access the family's vault as well. So yeah, each person has their own login, and that can be great if you might have, if you have kids, let's say, and they're of an age where they can use password managers. You might have some logins that you just don't want them to have access to. So it gives you that ability as well.
Yeah, and if they ever, I guess, get expelled from the family, you can just like axe their access as well from the family vault.
Yeah, yeah. Don't tell my wife about that one.
All right, so that's tip number 4 here: to use a family password manager. And again, 1Password, LastPass, Dashlane all have them. So whichever one you use, go check that out. So tip number 5, kind of related to that, is to use a team password manager. It's actually kind of like the same thing as a family plan, but for the workplace. So this is something we use at Asian Efficiency. So everyone in the company has their own login to the Asian Efficiency 1Password account, right? Where we share passwords and logins of everything that's inside the company. However, as kind of quote unquote the administrator, I can access accounts. I can add people to the like not the family, but even though I like to call our internally us here a family to the workplace, and you can kind of like manage it that way in that sense too. So I'm kind of curious, Brooks, since you are also like having access to both the team and the family plan, do you see a lot of overlap there? Is there kind of like a lot of oversight in the same way, like for example, in a team setting, in a workplace setting, I can see like, okay, I can't see what your password is, but I could see if it's strong or weak enough, right? And then I could say, hey, Brooks, like it looks like your password's a little weak. Like, would you mind changing it to something a little bit more complex? Is there like an oversight in the family plan like that too?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the as far as businesses go, one password kind of has two levels. There's the team plan and then the business plan. And the business and team ones have more of that type of admin type stuff, like where you can bug people if their passwords aren't strong enough and that sort of thing. I don't think it's been a while since I've looked at that side of things, but I don't think the family plan has that. But that is one benefit for having the team plan. You want to make sure that your security is always as strong as its weakest link. So you want to make sure, especially when you're a business, that your employees or your teammates are being at least a minimum level of security.
Yeah. So for those of you who run businesses or manages teams, like using a team password manager just makes things really easy to kind of share like documents, data, logins with each other. And the cool thing is, um, even if someone logs into your accounts, so for example, when I work with my executive assistant, she has access to a shared vault, but she cannot actually see the passwords. She can log into, for example, my bank account as an example, but she cannot actually see what my password is. She can just log in using her own password to log in. So that's like a cool feature about that as well, right? So for example, she can log into our, company PayPal accounts, but she doesn't actually see the password of her PayPal account. So she could like never change it or anything like that, but she could still log in using the 1Password app to make payments or request payments and so on. And so if you're in a team setting, I would highly recommend you use this because again, it makes the efficiency of your collaboration with your team members so much more efficient. And I find that also if you work with people outside your company, this is something that you can use as well, right? So for example, if you're working with a freelancer or a contractor, as long as they have, since we use 1Password, as long as they have 1Password as well, you can kind of share access to certain websites specifically to them. So you can say, hey, like here's our stock photo account that we use for our courses and blog posts and so on. I'm going to share this login into our vault. So you can just log in and use our account so you don't have to use yours, right? So there's like a lot of sharing that way that you can do and creates a lot of efficiency.
Now, I have a question for you. So you implemented a password manager. It was LastPass, well before I joined the agent efficiency team. What was it about those type of tool? Like, what made you decide that was an investment worth making? Is it like, were you having problems, or is it just something you wanted to be proactive about? Like, what was your decision making in implementing something like that? It turned out to be LastPass for agent efficiency, and kind of like how did that all work out, and what were your kind of thought process and decision making around that?
Yeah. So when we started agent efficiency, I use 1Password for my personal use, right? And then if I was working with, let's say, a designer, and I said, "Hey, could you log into my account here?" I would give them like my email address, my password, so that they could log in. But then if they went rogue or they went disappearing or something like that, then I would have to like change the password, right? And then like make sure that nothing went wrong and so on. So it just felt there was a lot of loopholes there. There was a lot of bugs and potential for being hacked. And again, if you're sharing passwords and such over email, like it could be easily compromised at one point, right? And so that's like one of the friction points that we had. And I said, okay, there has to be a better way about this. And back in the day, back in 2013, 14 or so, you were either using 1Password or LastPass. And back around that time, like 1Password was really good for personal use. but it wasn't really known for team settings. And the 1Password teams wasn't really taking off. It wasn't really well known, or it might not even be in existence at that point. And LastPass has been around for a while, and that was something people would use for personal use, but also on an enterprise level as well. So we made the decision to say, hey, let's implement 1Password for personal use, but then LastPass on the company level. So we have some form of separation as well. So if something gets compromised, it doesn't compromise everything. But also a lot of people were using LastPass at the time that we were contracting with. And so it was really easy to share logins with people that way, so that we could say, hey, if you need to log into our accounts, I'm going to share this with you. So they would never actually see the password, but could still log in. And then if our contract ended, or they just disappeared, or whatever happens, I wouldn't have to change the passwords. I would just remove access in the LastPass app, and good to go. Right. And so over time, I found out that LastPass was it's almost like too enterprise, to the point where if you're a small business, there's just so many features and roles and permission levels, and you can configure it to the smallest detail, which can actually be very powerful, but very confusing as well. So there's a lot of policies that you implement, but then one policy could not override another policy. And so if you were running into issues, you would have to debug kind of what policy is affecting what. And we were spending more time figuring out what policies were doing what than actually getting stuff done. And so, it's kind of our lack of experience of understanding LastPass. And this is where now, looking back now, 1Password for Teams really started to step up and mature in the last few years. And it was a little bit more expensive, but nowadays they're kind of the same price. And so now we made the decision to say, hey, okay, now that they're the same price, there's actually not that much of a benefit of using LastPass over 1Password. So we made the decision, I think in the last 18 months or so, to say, hey, let's move over to 1Password. And it's been smooth ever since. And now we have everything in one app, and I've been very happy with it.
Yeah, both are great. I don't think you can go wrong with either in a team setting. I find 1Password a little easier to use and easier to manage from the admin side. The one thing I would say LastPass has over it is LastPass has a little bit more granular settings of sharing specific content with specific people. You can definitely control who sees what in 1Password on a more vault level, but 1Password lets you be a little bit more granular. But I think it's all worked out. The transition has worked out for us fine. We haven't suffered from it. But as with any technology, some software is a little stronger in some areas and some than others. You can't really go wrong with either.
Yeah. So if you're, again, running a business or managing a team, we highly recommend you check out using a team password manager. So it could be something like 1Password or LastPass. Okay. So those are the 5 tips for today. And as always, we like to end things with simple and actionable steps that you can take, because we want to make sure that you take away from something like this episode and actually implement it as well, right? It's not just about more information, but actually implementation as well. So whatever you do, going forward, use good password practices like we talked about at the beginning, but also we recommend that you use a password manager going forward, whether it's the built-in tool or a third-party one. I think by now, we do recommend that you use a third-party one because it just comes with much more efficiencies and benefits. And our favorite one is 1Password, but pick the one that you think resonates with you the most. And once you start with one, just start saving passwords in there going forward. Just start saving passwords, start using it. Don't feel like you have to spend a lot of time getting it all set up and stuff. Anytime you log in, it will just prompt you saying, hey, do you want to save this in your particular password app? Just say yes. And then over time, you start accumulating your account data in there and then use it going forward. So don't worry about setting it up or spending too much time on it. Just pick one, start using it, and you'll start to see the benefits right away. Again, you can find links to everything that we talked about in today's show notes by going to theproductivityshow.com/340. And I'm really excited for next week's episode about contact management. So I'll see you then.